500 princesses stood in silk and diamonds, each one trained since birth to win a crown. The maid refilling their champagne kept her eyes down, invisible as always. Then the vampire king rose from his throne, walked past every royal daughter in the room, and offered his hand to the girl holding the tray. The crystal chandeliers cast diamonds of light across 500 silk gowns. Each princess stood straighter than the last, their smiles practiced to perfection, their curtsies measured to the inch. The ballroom of the Vampire King's palace had never held so much ambition in one room. Mira pressed herself against the velvet curtain near the servants' entrance, balancing a tray of empty champagne flutes. Her fingers ached. She'd been refilling glasses for 4 hours straight, watching princess after princess glide past the throne where King Alistair sat, still as carved marble, his dark eyes revealing nothing. "He'll choose before midnight," whispered Helena, another maid, squeezing past with a tray of petit fours. The tension's killing them. "Look at Princess Cordelia. She smiled so long her face must hurt." Mira glanced at the blonde princess from the Northern Isles, whose diamond tiara caught the light with every calculated laugh. Beside her, a princess in emerald silk from the Eastern Territories touched the king's armrest as she spoke, a bold move that made the other competitors stiffen. 20 kingdoms represented, Helena continued, loading Myra's tray with fresh glasses. Some sent 3 daughters each. "This isn't a ball, it's a battlefield in ball gowns." Mira nodded, turning back toward the floor. She'd worked in this palace for 3 years, ever since her father died and left her with nothing but debts. She'd scrubbed these marble floors, polished these golden banisters, served at 100 royal functions. She knew how to be invisible. But tonight, invisibility felt like armor she desperately needed. "The king will now make his selection." The master of ceremonies' voice cut through the music. The orchestra fell silent mid-note. 500 princesses stopped breathing. King Alistair rose from his throne. He was beautiful in the way dangerous things often are, sharp cheekbones, midnight black hair, eyes that had watched centuries pass. He wore black and silver, no crown, because he didn't need one. Every vampire in the room could feel his age, his power, radiating like heat from a forge. Mira started backing toward the servants' door. This was the moment she should disappear entirely. "Tradition demands I choose a queen," Alistair said, his voice carrying effortlessly across the silent hall. "My council has urged it for decades. The kingdom requires an heir. Alliances must be forged." He descended the steps of the dais slowly. "So, I have considered carefully." A princess from the southern deserts stepped forward slightly, her gold jewelry chiming softly. Princess Cordelia's smile brightened. The girl in emerald silk lifted her chin. "I have looked upon every eligible royal daughter in this room," Alistair continued, walking past the first row of princesses. "I have studied their kingdoms, their accomplishments, their virtues." Myra's shoulder bumped the doorframe. Just a few more steps and she'd be through. "And I have chosen." The king stopped walking. His head turned, not toward the princesses, but toward the shadows where the servants stood. His eyes locked on Myra's. "Her." The word dropped like a stone into still water. Myra's tray slipped from her hands. Crystal shattered across marble, the sound obscenely loud in the absolute silence. "Come here," Alistair said quietly, extending one hand toward her. Every head in the ballroom turned. 500 pairs of eyes found the girl in the plain gray dress, the maid with flowers still dusting her sleeve from the kitchens, whose hair had escaped its bun in unfashionable wisps around her face. "Your Majesty," the master of ceremonies stammered, "there must be, surely you mean—" "I mean Mira," Alistair's voice held no doubt. "Come here." Mira couldn't move. Her legs had forgotten how. This was a mistake, a cruel joke, Now, the command in that single word unfroze her. She stepped over the broken crystal, her worn shoes crunching glass. The sea of princesses parted as she walked, their perfume overwhelming, their silk gowns whispering against her rough cotton. Some faces showed shock. Others, barely contained rage. A few looked at her with something almost like pity, as if she were walking toward her execution rather than a proposal. Maybe she was. Alistair met her halfway, in the center of the ballroom, under the largest chandelier. Up close, his eyes were even more unsettling, ancient and knowing and fixed entirely on her. "Your Majesty," Mira whispered, her voice shaking, "I don't understand." "You will." He took her hand, her rough, work-worn hand that had scrubbed his floors, and raised it to his lips. The kiss was formal, but his thumb brushed across her knuckles with unexpected gentleness. "Mira of no house and no title, will you be my queen?" The ballroom held its breath. Mira looked past him at the throne, at the court of ancient vampires watching with calculating eyes, at the princesses whose futures she'd just destroyed with her mere existence. Princess Cordelia's smile had frozen into something terrible. The girl in emerald silk had gone pale as death. "I'm nobody," Mira heard herself say. "You're honest." Alistair's grip on her hand tightened slightly. "In a room full of people who've rehearsed every word, every gesture, every smile, you're the only one who's ever been real. That's not nothing." "But I don't know how to." "Say yes or no," his voice softened. "I won't force you. But know this, I didn't choose you on impulse. I've watched you for 3 years. Your kindness to the younger maids, your fairness when others would steal credit, your strength when your father died, and you had every reason to break. I need someone honest beside me, Mira. Not someone who wants a crown." She looked into his eyes and saw something unexpected: loneliness. The kind that came from centuries of people wanting what you had rather than who you were. "Yes," she whispered, and immediately wondered if she'd lost her mind. Alistair smiled, a real smile, the first she'd ever seen on his face. He turned to face the court, keeping her hand in his. "I present to you," he announced, "your future queen." Nobody applauded. Nobody cheered. The silence was so complete that Mira could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. Then, one by one, the vampires of the court knelt. They had no choice. Their king had chosen. The princesses remained standing for one moment longer, a wall of disbelief and fury, before political training took over. They sank into curtsies, their silk pooling around them like the petals of dying flowers. But their eyes, as they rose, promised that this wasn't over. Not even close. The queen's chambers were 3 times the size of the servants' quarters where Mira had slept for 3 years. Sunlight poured through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating furniture that cost more than her father had earned in his lifetime. A 4-poster bed dominated the room, draped in silver silk. Oil paintings of former queens lined the walls, their eyes seeming to judge the impostor now standing among them. Mira touched the edge of a velvet chair and pulled her hand back, feeling like a thief. "Your breakfast, Your Majesty." A maid entered, Claire, who used to share bread with Mira during night shifts. Now Claire wouldn't meet her eyes as she set the tray down with a sharp click. "Claire, you don't have to. Protocol requires proper address." Claire's voice was ice. She curtsied, the gesture technically perfect, but somehow mocking. "Will there be anything else, Your Majesty?" Myra's throat tightened.
No.
"Thank you." Claire left without another word. Through the open door, Mira caught a glimpse of 2 other servants whispering, their heads snapping apart when they noticed her watching. She'd gained a crown and lost every friend in a single night. A knock interrupted her spiraling thoughts. The royal secretary entered, a vampire named Lord Castellan whose silver hair spoke of age beyond measure. He bowed, properly, unlike Claire, but his expression remained carefully neutral. "The princesses have been granted rooms in the East Wing," he announced. "Diplomatic courtesy, as their kingdoms require. Proper notification before they depart. Some will stay a week. Others, perhaps longer, while treaties are renegotiated." Renegotiated? Myra's stomach dropped. "Your selection has complicated certain arrangements." Castellan's tone gave nothing away. Princess Cordelia's kingdom was promised favorable trade routes. Princess Seraphine's marriage would have ended a border dispute. These matters now require alternative solutions. In other words, Mira had created a political disaster. The princesses have invited you to tea this afternoon, Castellan continued, handing her a cream-colored card with elegant script. The Rose Garden. 4 o'clock. It would be inadvisable to refuse. It wasn't an invitation. It was a summons. The Rose Garden at 4 o'clock was a carefully staged performance. 6 princesses sat around a white iron table, their afternoon gowns perfect, their smiles sharp as knives. Princess Cordelia presided at the head, her diamond jewelry catching the sunlight like weapons. Mira approached in a dress that had been waiting in her chambers, pale blue silk that felt foreign against her skin. She tried to style her hair the way the other maids used to do for noble ladies, but strands kept escaping, marking her as an amateur in a room full of professionals. Your Majesty, Cordelia's greeting was honey over poison. How kind of you to join us. Please sit. Every eye tracked Mira as she took the empty chair. A servant poured tea into delicate porcelain, the same kind of cup Mira had washed 1,000 times in the kitchens. We were just discussing the ball, said Princess Seraphine, the girl who'd worn emerald silk. Her voice was silk too, smooth and deadly. Such a surprising conclusion. None of us saw it coming. Surprising, echoed Princess Talia from the southern deserts, her dark eyes studying Mira like a specimen. That's certainly one word for it. Mira lifted her teacup. Every princess did the same, a synchronized movement that felt like a test. They all stopped mid-sip, cups frozen halfway to their lips, watching her. She was supposed to drink first. The queen drank first. But if she did, would the tea be poisoned? Or was that paranoid? These were princesses, not assassins. Except they were also political players who'd just lost everything. Mira set her cup down untouched. I understand the situation is difficult. Difficult. Cordelia's laugh was like breaking glass. My dear, you've disrupted 20 years of diplomatic negotiations. My kingdom's alliance with the vampire territories was built on my marriage to King Alistair. Now my father is furious, his council is demanding answers, and our trade agreements hang by a thread. But yes, difficult, captures it beautifully. I didn't ask for this, Mira said quietly. No, you just accepted it. Seraphine's smile never wavered. A maid who knows her place doesn't reach above it. Unless she's ambitious enough to seduce a king. I never. Please, Talia waved a jeweled hand. We're all women here.
No judgment.
You saw an opportunity and took it. Admirable, really, in a ruthless sort of way. But now you're in our world, and our world has rules. The princesses leaned forward slightly, a movement so subtle that anyone watching from a distance would miss it. But Mira felt the threat like a blade against her throat. First rule, Cordelia said softly, is that queens don't come from nowhere. They have bloodlines, training, power. They have kingdoms backing them. You have what? A dead father and debts. Second rule, Seraphine continued, is that love doesn't conquer politics. The king may want you now, but when kingdoms start threatening war, when trade collapses, when people starve because treaties fail, how long before he realizes you're not worth the cost? Third rule, Talia finished, is that accidents happen in palaces. Tragic, unfortunate accidents. Especially to girls who don't know how to watch their backs. The tea sat steaming between them, ignored now. The roses around them bloomed beautiful and thorned. I should go, Mira whispered, standing on shaking legs. Yes, you should. Cordelia's smile was radiant and terrible. We'll see you tomorrow, Your Majesty.
Same time.
After all, we're going to be here for a while. Mira walked back to her chambers, feeling 500 eyes on her back, and finally understood. The ball hadn't been the competition. It had only been the beginning. The candles in Princess Cordelia's chambers burned low, casting long shadows across 3 faces bent together in conspiracy. Outside, the palace slept. Inside, kingdoms plotted. We're running out of time. Princess Seraphine paced near the window, her emerald robe trailing behind her. My father's letters grow more urgent. He's threatening to withdraw our trade fleet from the northern ports. That's 60% of the Vampire Kingdom's imported grain. My mother's worse. Princess Isla spoke for the first time, her voice soft but cold. She was smaller than the others, with red hair and pale skin that marked her as being from the Misty Isles, a kingdom whispered to practice old magic. She sent 3 blood-sealed messages, each one shorter than the last. The final one said only, "Fix this, or I will." Cordelia stopped pouring wine and looked up sharply. "Your mother is the Witch Queen Morgana." Yes, Isla's smile was bitter. "Which means if I return home without a crown, she'll consider it a personal failure. And my mother doesn't accept failure. She erases it." The 3 princesses exchanged looks heavy with understanding. They'd been competitors yesterday. Tonight, they were allies bound by desperation. "So we agree," Cordelia said, setting down the wine decanter with a soft click. "The maid cannot become queen. Not a week from now, not a month, not ever." "The wedding is scheduled for the next full moon," Seraphine said. 3 weeks. Once they're married, it's done. Vampire wedding bonds are unbreakable, literally. The magic binds their lives together. We'd have no moves left. Then we have 3 weeks to remove her from the board. Isla moved closer to the candlelight, and for a moment, her shadow seemed too large, too dark, stretching across the wall like something alive. "The question is how." "Not poison," Cordelia said immediately. "Too obvious, and the king would investigate. He'd discover who had means and motive." "Not a direct attack either," Seraphine added. "The king has already increased guards around her chambers. 2 vampires at her door at all times now. Ancient ones, I checked. Then we make it look like an accident." Isla's fingers traced patterns on the table, unconscious movements that left frost in their wake. Something tragic, but believable. A fall, perhaps. A terrible stumble at the wrong moment. These old palaces have so many dangerous stairs. Cordelia leaned back, her mind working through the angles. The grand staircase. 70 marble steps. Nobles use it daily for court proceedings. If she fell there in public with witnesses. "No one could blame us," Seraphine finished, understanding dawning in her eyes. "We'd be nowhere near her. Just 3 princesses taking morning air in the gardens, visible to dozens of servants." "I can handle the mechanics," Isla said quietly. "A loose tile. A subtle shift in the stone that triggers at the right weight, the right step. My mother taught me spell work that leaves no trace. It looks like natural deterioration, not sabotage." "What if she survives the fall?" Cordelia's question hung in the air like smoke. "From 70 marble steps." Isla's smile didn't reach her eyes. "The human body is fragile, Cordelia. Even if she lives, she'll be too injured to marry. The king would need to wait months for her to heal, if she ever does. That gives us time to work on him, to remind him what a real queen looks like." Seraphine moved to the window, checking the corridor beyond. Empty. She closed the heavy curtain. "We need to be clear about what we're doing. This isn't jealousy. This isn't about wounded pride. It's survival," Cordelia agreed. "My kingdom's stability depends on this alliance. My younger sister's futures depend on it. Hundreds of thousands of people depend on the trade routes we negotiated. My family's shipping empire will collapse without vampire port access," Seraphine said. 3 generations of work gone. My brothers will lose everything. And I'll be lucky if my mother only disowns me. Isla's voice was flat. "More likely, she'll make an example of me. Show the court what happens to daughters who fail." The 3 princesses looked at each other, and in that moment, they weren't beautiful noble women playing at politics. They were survivors, trapped between duty and disaster, making the only choice they believed they had left. "We all understand the stakes," Cordelia said, her voice steady. "Once we do this, there's no going back. If we're discovered..." "We won't be," Isla interrupted. "I'll place the spell tonight. 3 days from now, During the morning court session, she'll use those stairs. She always does. I've watched her routine. The tile will crack. She'll fall. And the maid who thought she could be queen will learn that fairy tales don't come true for girls without power. What about the king? Seraphine asked. He chose her for a reason. He might. Kings are practical, Cordelia cut in. He'll mourn, perhaps. But he still needs a queen, and when the time comes, we'll be there. Poised, appropriate, ready to help him rebuild what was broken. He'll see reason. 3 days, Eastlaw confirmed, standing. The morning of the court assembly. Half the kingdom will be there. It will be public, tragic, and utterly unavoidable. They joined hands then, the three of them, sealing an alliance that had nothing to do with friendship and everything to do with survival. Outside, the palace slept on, unaware that in a candlelit room, 3 desperate women had just signed a death warrant. And somewhere in the queen's chambers, Mira lay awake, feeling the weight of a crown she'd never asked for, and the enemies she couldn't yet see. 3 days later, Mira descended the grand staircase with Lady Ashford, an elderly vampire who served as her reluctant etiquette instructor. Shoulders back, chin level, Lady Ashford corrected for the 10th time that morning. A queen doesn't look at her feet. She trusts the ground beneath her. Ironic advice, given that Mira trusted nothing in this palace anymore. The morning court assembly had just concluded. Below, in the entrance hall, nobles clustered in small groups, their conversations echoing off marble. Mira recognized some faces, ambassadors, council members, and 3 princesses standing near the fountain, their mourning gowns pristine, their positions perfectly calculated to be visible but distant. Cordelia, Seraphine, and Eastlaw, always together now, always watching. Your Majesty, a young noble bowed as she passed. His courtesy was flawless, his eyes empty of warmth. Mira nodded, still uncomfortable with the title. 3 weeks in these chambers, and she still woke up expecting to light fires and prepare breakfast trays. Posture, Lady Ashford hissed. Mira straightened, focusing on the stairs ahead. 70 steps of pristine white marble, worn smooth by centuries of royal feet. Morning sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, painting rainbow patterns across the stone. She took another step, then another. The marble beneath her left foot shifted. It was subtle, just a slight give, like stepping on sand instead of stone. Myra's weight transferred forward as the tile's edge cracked with a sound like breaking bone. Her ankle twisted. Her balance vanished. Your Majesty, Lady Ashford's hand grasped air as Mira pitched forward. The world tilted. 70 marble steps stretched below her, each one a promise of broken bones and shattered skull. Myra's arms wheeled uselessly. Her scream caught in her throat.
She fell.
And fell into impossibly strong arms. Alistair appeared between one heartbeat and the next, vampire speed that made him seem to materialize from shadows. He caught her midair, one arm beneath her knees, the other supporting her back, stopping her fall as effortlessly as catching a leaf. For a moment, they hung there, suspended in the golden morning light. I have you, he said quietly. Mira couldn't breathe. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She'd been falling, she'd been dying, and now. What happened? Alistair's voice remained soft, but something in it made every conversation in the hall below cease instantly. The tile, Lady Ashford's face had gone sheet white. It broke. I saw it break. Alistair set Mira down carefully on a secure step, then turned to examine the spot where she'd stumbled. His fingers traced the cracked marble, the displaced tile that now sat at an unnatural angle. When he looked up, his eyes had changed. They weren't the warm brown she'd grown used to during their brief conversations. They were black, completely black, like staring into an abyss, and ancient beyond measure. This tile was sound yesterday, he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. I walked these steps myself. Perhaps deterioration, Your Majesty, suggested a council member nervously. The palace is old. This palace is 600 years old. These stairs are original. Do you know how many people have walked them in that time? Alistair stood slowly, and despite his stillness, everyone took an unconscious step back.
Milio.
And in 600 years, not one tile has cracked. Until today. Until my betrothed walks them. The silence was suffocating. Mira watched from her step as Alistair's gaze swept the hall, touching on each face, reading expressions with centuries of experience. The nobles wouldn't meet his eyes. The servants pressed themselves against walls. And near the fountain, 3 princesses stood frozen, their morning tea forgotten, their carefully maintained composure showing its first cracks. "Clear the hall," Alistair commanded. "Everyone except the palace engineers and the head of security."
Now.
The crowd dispersed like smoke, nobles and servants alike fleeing the king's presence. But Mira noticed. Cordelia grabbed Islaw's wrist as they left, a grip tight enough to whiten her knuckles. Seraphine's perfect posture had gone rigid. They knew. Somehow, they knew this wasn't over. "Come," Alistair offered Mira his hand. "We're done here for today." He led her not back to her chambers, but to his private study, a room she'd never entered before. Books lined every wall, floor to ceiling. A fire crackled in the hearth despite the warm day. Maps covered a massive oak table, marking territories and trade routes with careful precision. "Sit," Alistair said, guiding her to a chair near the fire. He knelt in front of her, examining her twisted ankle with gentle fingers. "Does this hurt?" A little. Myra's voice came out smaller than she intended. "You saved me. I almost didn't reach you in time." His jaw tightened. "Another second and you would have fallen too far, too fast. Even I can't reverse broken necks." "It was an accident." "It wasn't." Alistair looked up at her, his eyes back to their normal brown but still holding traces of that ancient darkness. "Mira, I need you to understand something. You're not safe here. You haven't been since I chose you. I thought the guards would be enough, that political courtesy would protect you. I was wrong. Then maybe," Myra's throat tightened, "maybe you should choose someone else. Someone they'll accept. Someone who won't cause." "No," the word was absolute. "We'll discuss this later. Right now, I'm teaching you something I should have taught you immediately." He moved behind her, adjusting her posture, positioning her arms. "If someone attacks you," he said quietly, his breath against her ear, "this is how you fight back." And in that firelit study, surrounded by maps of kingdoms that wanted her gone, Mira learned her first lesson in survival. Trust no one, watch everything, and never assume the ground beneath your feet is solid. Midnight found Mira staring at the ceiling of her chambers, sleep impossible. Her ankle throbbed despite the physician's wrappings. Every creak of the palace settling made her flinch. She kept seeing that moment, the marble shifting, the empty air, the 70 steps waiting to break her. Alistair's words echoed. It wasn't an accident. She'd wanted to believe he was being paranoid. But the way those 3 princesses had looked at each other as they left the hall, guilty recognition passing between them like a shared secret, made her stomach turn. The guards outside her door changed shifts at midnight. She heard their muffled exchange, then footsteps receding down the corridor. The new guards would take their positions. She was safe. She had to be. Mira closed her eyes, forcing herself to breathe slowly. In for 4 counts, out for 4. The meditation technique her father had taught her when she was small and afraid of storms. A window latch clicked softly. Her eyes flew open. The sound came from the sitting room adjacent to her bedroom, where the balcony doors led to a decorative ledge that connected to the east wing. She'd asked for those doors to be locked, but the maids had assured her no one could reach the 3rd floor without. Another sound, a careful footstep on marble. Someone was inside. Myra's heart stopped, then exploded into a gallop. She slid out of bed as silently as possible, her injured ankle screaming protest. The guards were outside the main door, too far to hear a whisper. She was alone.
No.
Not alone. Someone was here. She pressed herself against the wall beside the bedroom doorway, remembering Alistair's lessons from that afternoon. Stay low. Use your opponent's momentum against them. Aim for vulnerable points: throat, eyes, knees. A shadow moved across the sitting room floor, backlit by moonlight. Tall, slender, wearing dark clothes and a black mask that covered everything but cold, calculating eyes. The intruder moved toward the bedroom with practiced silence, a blade gleaming in one gloved hand. Not a sword, something smaller, designed for close work, for murder that needed to be quiet. Myra's breath came in shallow gasps. She had seconds before the attacker reached the bed and discovered it empty. The figure passed through the doorway. Mira moved. She wasn't graceful. She wasn't trained. But terror gave her speed, and desperation gave her strength. She lunged low, just as Alistair had shown her, grabbing the attacker's knife wrist with both hands. The intruder jerked in surprise, clearly expecting a sleeping target, not resistance. The blade swept toward Myra's throat, but she twisted, using her whole body weight to pull the arm down and sideways. They crashed into the bedside table. The oil lamp shattered. Glass bit into Myra's shoulder, but she held on, feeling the attacker's superior strength beginning to overpower her grip. Guards, Mira screamed, knowing they were too far, knowing she had seconds before this blade found her heart. Guards. The attacker's free hand grabbed her throat, squeezing. Myra's vision sparked with darkness. She drove her knee upward blindly, connecting with something soft. The grip on her throat loosened slightly. She bit down hard on the gloved hand near her face. Tasted leather, and beneath it, blood. The attacker snarled, a distinctly feminine sound, and slammed Mira against the floor. The impact knocked the air from her lungs. The blade rose, moonlight running along its edge like water. This was how she died. 3 weeks a queen, killed in her own chambers by someone who... The bedroom door exploded inward. Alistair appeared like a nightmare-given form, his speed making him nearly invisible. One moment the attacker was above Mira, blade descending. The next, the intruder was airborne, sailing across the room to hit the wall with bone-crushing force. The knife clattered across the floor. "Don't move." Alistair's voice was barely human, something older and infinitely more dangerous speaking through him. He stood between Mira and the attacker, and even from behind, she could see the predator he'd become. His shoulders had broadened, his fingers had lengthened into claws, and the shadows around him seemed to writhe like living things. The guards burst in, weapons drawn, faces pale with terror at finding their king in this state. "Secure the attacker," Alistair commanded without turning.
Gently.
"I want them alive to answer questions." Only then did he look back at Mira, still sprawled on the floor, bleeding from a dozen glass cuts, throat bruised, but alive. His features softened marginally, the monster receding enough to let the man show through. "You fought," he said, something like pride and pain mixing in his voice. "You actually fought. You taught me to." Myra's voice came out ruined from the choking. The guards hauled the attacker upright, one of them reaching for the mask. The intruder struggled, but vampire strength held them immobile. The mask came off. Princess Isla's red hair spilled free, her pale face cut and bleeding from the wall impact. But her eyes blazed with cold fury and not a trace of remorse. "You," Alistair breathed. "The Witch Queen's daughter. She doesn't belong here." Isla's voice was steady despite her situation. "She's a stain on everything monarchy represents. I did what was necessary. You broke sacred hospitality laws." Alistair moved toward her, each step measured. "You attempted regicide. Do you understand what you've done? What your mother will?" "My mother ordered it," Isla interrupted, and the room went deathly silent. Not explicitly, but her last message was clear. "Fix this or I will." So I fixed it. Or tried to. She looked past Alistair to Mira, still on the floor, and smiled, a terrible, desperate smile. "You should have died on those stairs," Isla whispered. It would have been kinder. What comes next will be so much worse. The War Strategy Hall was a room Mira had never seen, buried deep in the palace's oldest wing, where only the king's inner council gathered during crisis. Maps covered the walls, some centuries old, showing borders that no longer existed and kingdoms long fallen to dust. Now those maps were being updated with red markers. 3 kingdoms have formally protested, Lord Castellan reported, his silver hair gleaming in the lamplight. The Misty Isles, naturally, are demanding Princess Isla's immediate release. But the Northern Isles and the Eastern Territories have also sent strongly worded correspondence. Strongly worded General Thorne, the vampire who commanded the king's military, let out a harsh laugh. Is that what we're calling threats of war now? Castellan slid a sealed letter across the table. The wax bore the mark of the Misty Isles, a serpent eating its tail. This arrived an hour ago. From the Witch Queen Morgana herself. Alistair broke the seal and read in silence. His expression revealed nothing, but Mira noticed his knuckles whitening where they gripped the parchment. She says if her daughter is harmed in any way, she'll consider it an act of war, he said finally. She's already mobilized forces to the border. 3,000 soldiers. And she's reminding me that her magic can rot crops, spoil water sources, and bring plague. Empty threats, Thorne scoffed. We have. They're not empty. Alistair set the letter down carefully. I've seen what Morgana did to the southern principalities 40 years ago when they insulted her. Every well in their capital turned to blood for a month. Children died. The elderly died. By the time she lifted the curse, the prince was begging for mercy. Silence fell over the council table. The Northern Isles are moving differently, Castellan continued. Princess Cordelia's father is threatening to close their ports to our grain ships. They provide 60% of our winter stores. If they follow through, people starve, finished Lady Ashford, who sat at the far end of the table. Not immediately, but by midwinter, the shortages begin. By spring, we'll have riots. And the Eastern Territories? Alistair asked. Seraphine's family controls the shipping lanes, General Thorne said grimly. They're suggesting that piracy has become a problem in their waters. That they might not be able to guarantee safe passage for vessels flying vampire flags. It's not a direct blockade, but it might as well be. Alistair leaned back in his chair, the weight of 600 years pressing down on his shoulders. So, 3 kingdoms positioning for conflict. Economic warfare, magical warfare, and conventional military threat. All because I dared choose. He stopped himself, but everyone's eyes had already shifted to Mira. She sat at the far corner of the table, her throat still bruised purple from Isla's attack, her shoulder bandaged where glass had cut deep. They'd given her a seat at this council, not out of respect, she suspected, but because the crisis was about her. She was the problem that needed solving. Your Majesty, Lord Castellan said carefully, there are options. Diplomatic solutions that might ease tensions. Say what you mean. Alistair's voice was dangerously quiet. If the engagement were dissolved, if you were to choose a princess more politically advantageous. Princess Cordelia's father has indicated he'd forget this unpleasantness entirely in exchange for no. The word cut through the room like a blade. Every counselor shifted uncomfortably. Your Majesty, please consider. I said no. Alistair stood, his chair scraping against stone. What you're suggesting is that I reward 3 women who conspired to commit murder. That I tell every ambitious noble in this kingdom that the way to influence the throne is through violence and threats. We're talking about avoiding war, Thorne pressed. About keeping our people fed through winter. About not facing an enemy who can curse our water and destroy our crops with words. Personal preferences have to bow to. This isn't about preference. Alistair's voice shook the chandeliers. This is about principle. About whether we rule through fear or through law. Mira couldn't stay silent anymore. Her voice came out hoarse, damaged, but steady. Let me go. Every head turned toward her. Your Majesty, Castellan began. Mira, she corrected quietly. That's who I am. That's all I've ever been. And he's right. You can't reward what they did. But you also can't let people starve for me. You can't risk war for a maid who doesn't even know which fork to use at state dinners. Mira, don't. Alistair started. I'll step aside. She forced herself to look at him, this king who'd chosen her for reasons she still didn't fully understand. I'll go quietly. You can say I was unsuitable, that I chose to leave. Pick Princess Cordelia, make the trade agreements, and everyone wins. Except me, but... Her voice cracked. I never belonged here anyway. The counselors looked relieved. Thorne nodded approval. Even Lady Ashford seemed to think this was the rational choice. Alistair walked around the table slowly. He took Myra's hand, her rough, bandaged hand, and pulled her to her feet. Then he turned to face his council. Clear the room, he said softly. Everyone except Mira.
Now.
Your Majesty, we need to.
Now.
They fled. Ancient vampires who'd served the throne for centuries, military commanders who'd fought in a dozen wars, advisors who'd counseled 3 kings, all of them scattered like leaves before a storm. When the last one was gone, Alistair closed the heavy doors, locked them. Listen to me, he said, his hands on Myra's shoulders, his eyes burning with intensity. Peace built on fear is not peace. It's surrender wearing a crown. I will not trade you for a treaty. I will not bow to kingdoms that think violence is negotiation. Do you understand? But the people will be protected. By me. By our military. By every resource this kingdom has. He pulled her closer. You think you're not worth it. You think you're just a maid who got lucky. But you fought an assassin in the dark. You survived a fall meant to kill you. And just now, you offered to sacrifice yourself for people who've shown you nothing but coldness. That's what makes a queen, Mira. Not bloodlines. Not politics. That. Myra's eyes burned with tears she refused to shed. What if you're wrong? She whispered. What if I'm not strong enough for what's coming? Then we'll face it together. His smile was sad and certain. And we'll teach these kingdoms that the new queen is not someone they can threaten, manipulate, or remove. Outside the locked doors, kingdoms prepared for war. Inside, 2 people made a different kind of stand, the kind that cost everything and promised nothing except the chance to be true. The grand hall had been transformed into a court of judgment. Benches lined both sides, filled with nobles, ambassadors, and representatives from 20 kingdoms. The 3 princesses sat together in the front row, Cordelia regal and composed, Seraphine perfectly postured, and between them an empty seat where Isla should have been. She stood instead in the center of the hall, wrists bound with silver chains that suppressed magic. Her red hair hung loose around her pale face. She looked smaller, somehow younger, stripped of her princess facade. Mira entered from the side door, and the room fell silent. She wore deep blue, not a gown meant for seduction or display, but something practical, elegant, chosen to be heard rather than admired. Her bruised throat was visible, the marks of attempted murder on display, for everyone to see. Alistair sat on the throne, but when Mira approached, he gestured to the chair beside him, the queen's seat, equal in height to his own. This court is convened, Lord Castellan announced, to address the charge of attempted regicide against Princess Isla of the Misty Isles. And conspiracy, added General Thorne. The staircase trap could not have been accomplished alone. Cordelia's expression never flickered. Seraphine studied her folded hands. But Mira saw it, the slight tension in their shoulders, the way they'd positioned themselves for a quick exit. Princess Isla, Alistair's voice carried across the hall. You attempted to murder my betrothed. You broke hospitality laws that have stood for 1,000 years. Under vampire law, the punishment is death. Do you have anything to say in your defense? Isla lifted her chin. I did what I believed was right, what my kingdom needed. What? Her voice wavered slightly. What my mother would have demanded of me. Your mother, Alistair leaned forward. The witch queen who even now masses troops at our border. who threatens plague and famine if we execute her daughter. Tell me, princess, are you a murderer by choice, or a tool wielded by someone else's hand? The question hung in the air like smoke. Isla's composure cracked. I'm her daughter. I don't get to choose. None of us do. She gestured to the assembled princesses. Do you think any of us wanted to compete for a crown? We were sent, ordered. Our kingdom's futures balanced on our shoulders. And when she looked at Mira with something almost like pity. When she was chosen instead, everything we'd sacrificed meant nothing. So you decided murder was justified, Alistair said coldly. I decided survival was necessary, Isla's voice strengthened. My mother doesn't tolerate failure. If I'd returned without a crown, I'd have faced worse than your executioner's blade. At least your death would be quick. Mira stood. The movement surprised everyone, including Alistair. May I speak? She asked quietly. Alistair studied her face, then nodded. The floor recognizes the future queen. Mira descended from the throne platform and walked toward Isla. Gasps rippled through the crowd, the victim approaching her attacker, close enough to touch. You tried to kill me, Mira said simply.
Twice.
Once on the stairs, once in my chambers. You held a knife to my throat. Yes, Isla met her eyes directly. I did. Why tell me this? Why not lie, claim it was someone else? Because I'm tired of lying, Isla's voice dropped to a whisper. I'm tired of being a pawn in games I never asked to play. Kill me. Don't kill me. It doesn't matter anymore. At least it will be over. Mira turned to face the assembled court. Her heart hammered, but her voice stayed steady. I could demand execution, she said. Under law, I have that right. But I'm not interested in revenge. I'm interested in understanding why 20 kingdoms sent their daughters here like sacrificial pieces on a game board. She looked at Cordelia and Seraphine. You helped plan this. Don't bother denying it. I saw your faces when the staircase trap failed. You knew. Cordelia opened her mouth to protest, but Mira raised a hand. I'm not calling for your execution. I'm calling for honesty. Because if we punish Princess Isla and ignore the system that created her desperation, we solve nothing. The next desperate princess will try something worse. What are you suggesting? Lord Castellan asked carefully. Mira turned back to Isla. You said you're tired of being a pawn. What if you could be something else? I don't understand. The border territories between our kingdoms and yours, they're disputed, dangerous, constantly on the edge of conflict. They need someone who understands both sides. Someone who can negotiate before tensions explode into war. Mira glanced at Alistair, hoping he'd understand. They need a peace ambassador. The hall erupted in whispers. You want to reward her? General Thorne stood, outraged. She tried to murder you. I want to use her, Mira corrected. She speaks our language and theirs. She understands magic and politics. She's a princess who failed to win a crown. That makes her sympathetic to other kingdoms, not threatening. And most importantly, she looked at Isla again. She wants a way out from under her mother's control. Isla's eyes widened. The border territories would put me 3 weeks' travel from the Misty Isles. My mother couldn't summon me home on a whim. I'd have autonomy. You'd have responsibility, Mira said. Real work, real purpose. Not as a marriage prize, but as a diplomat. Fail, and you face exile. Succeed, and you help prevent the very wars your actions nearly started. This is unprecedented, Castellan muttered. So was choosing a maid as queen, Mira replied. We're rewriting rules today, either way. We can rewrite them with blood and executions, or we can try something different. She turned to Alistair. Your Majesty, the decision is ultimately yours. But I'm asking, let justice be transformative, not just punitive. The hall held its breath. Alistair stood slowly, descending to stand beside Mira. When he spoke, his voice carried centuries of authority. Princess Isla of the Misty Isles, you are hereby appointed peace ambassador to the northern border territories, effective immediately. You will reside in Borderwatch Keep, report monthly to this court, and work to prevent conflicts before they require military intervention. You will do this for a minimum of 5 years. After that, your record will determine whether you're granted full pardon or face further judgment. Do you accept these terms? Isla looked between Mira and Alistair, something like hope breaking through her despair. I accept. The silver chains were removed. Isla rubbed her wrists, then, surprising everyone, knelt before Mira. I don't ask forgiveness, she said quietly. But I promise I'll earn this chance you've given me. Mira helped her stand. Then we're agreed. As Isla was escorted out, Mira turned back to the assembled court. She saw Cordelia and Seraphine watching with new calculation in their eyes, not plotting her death now, but reassessing who she actually was. She saw ambassadors leaning together, whispering rapidly, realizing the maid-turned-queen had just outmaneuvered them all. She saw Alistair looking at her with something that made her heart skip. Pride, yes, but also recognition. He'd chosen well, and now everyone else was beginning to see it too. The girl who'd scrubbed floors had just taught a room full of nobles what mercy with teeth looked like. The Moon Garden was Myra's favorite place in the palace, a secret she discovered during her years as a maid, when she'd slip away after midnight shifts to breathe air that didn't smell of polish and soap. Tonight, she walked its silver paths as queen. The trial had ended hours ago. Ambassadors had departed with new treaties to draft. Cordelia and Seraphine had left for their kingdoms the next morning, their departure quiet and dignified, no more plots whispered in candlelit rooms. The palace felt different now, still not warm, perhaps, but no longer actively hostile. Mira found the stone bench beneath the flowering night blooms, their white petals luminous in the moonlight. She sat, finally alone, and let herself feel the weight of everything that had happened. I thought I'd find you here. Alistair emerged from the garden path, still in his formal court attire but with his jacket discarded, his shirt open at the collar. He looked less like a king and more like a man who'd survived a storm. How did you know? Mira asked. I didn't. But I've watched you for 3 years, remember? He sat beside her, careful to leave space between them. Whenever the palace became too much, you'd disappear for exactly 20 minutes. I eventually followed one night, just to make sure you were safe, and found you here, staring at the moon like it might have answers. Did you think I was planning to run away? I thought you were surviving the only way you knew how. His voice was gentle. Taking moments of peace, wherever you could find them. They sat in comfortable silence, the night air sweet with flower scent. Somewhere in the distance, a fountain splashed softly. I'm terrified, Mira admitted finally. Today in that hall, I felt like I knew what to do. Like the words just came. But now I'm wondering if I got lucky, if next time I'll make a mistake that costs lives. You will make mistakes. Alistair turned to look at her, his face half-shadowed by moonlight. Every ruler does. I've made mistakes that haunted me for decades. But today? What you did wasn't luck, Mira. It was wisdom. I just didn't want more death. Is that wisdom or weakness? It's strength. He shifted closer, closing some of that careful distance. Do you know how many people in that hall expected you to demand Isla's execution? How many thought you'd want revenge, blood, public punishment? All of them, Mira said quietly.
Yes.
Because that's what power usually does. It takes and takes until there's nothing left. But you gave instead. You turned an enemy into an asset, satisfied justice, without creating a martyr, and showed 20 kingdoms that the new queen plays a different game entirely. He smiled, and it reached his eyes. Half those ambassadors are terrified of you now. Of me? The maid. Of you? The queen who thinks 3 moves ahead while appearing merciful. Alistair took her hand, his fingers tracing the calluses that hadn't quite faded from years of scrubbing floors. You were never just a maid, Mira. You were always this person. I just gave you a platform to show it. Mira looked down at their joined hands. Why did you really choose me? Not the diplomatic answer you gave the court. The true reason. Alistair was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of centuries. I've been king for 600 years. In that time, I've been surrounded by people who want something from me: power, favor, immortality, alliances. They smile when I enter rooms because they're supposed to. They agree with me because disagreement is dangerous. They love the crown, not the man wearing it. He turned her hand over, pressing his palm against hers. But 3 years ago, I walked past the kitchens at dawn and heard you singing. Some folk song I hadn't heard in a century. You were kneading bread, covered in flour, and you thought no one was watching. You were just yourself. Completely, unself-consciously yourself. And later that day, I saw you split your lunch with a girl who'd been caught stealing. You could have reported her, but instead you shared. That's when I knew. Knew what? That you were real in a palace full of performances. His thumb brushed across her knuckles. I didn't choose you to make a political statement. I chose you because in 600 years, you're the first person who made me feel like something other than a crown with a heartbeat. Myra's eyes stung. I'm still going to make mistakes. I'm going to embarrass you at state functions and use the wrong fork and you'll do it honestly. Alistair interrupted gently. That's all I ask. Be honest with me. Be yourself. Don't try to become what you think a queen should be. Be the queen only you can be. What if I don't know how? Then we figure it out together. He stood, pulling her up with him. That's what partnership means. I've been alone for a very long time, Mira. I don't want to be alone anymore. She looked up at him. This ancient king who'd chosen her from 500 princesses, who defended her against kingdoms and council both, who looked at her like she was worth the wars they'd nearly faced. I'm not alone anymore either, she whispered. He kissed her then, gentle and certain, in a garden full of night blooms and moonlight. And for the first time since he'd taken her hand in that ballroom, Mira didn't feel like an imposter wearing borrowed silk. She felt like herself. The moon climbed higher, painting the garden in silver. The palace rose around them, full of nobles and servants and centuries of history. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, treaties to negotiate, kingdoms to reassure, a wedding to plan that would unite a king and a former maid in ways that still scandalized half the realm. But tonight, in the quiet garden where she'd once come to escape, Mira finally stopped running. She'd been chosen not for her bloodline or her beauty or her political value. She'd been chosen because she'd never pretended to be anything other than exactly who she was. And somehow, impossibly, that had been enough. The maid who became a queen not by losing herself, but by remaining true to who she'd always been. That was the real magic. Not in spells or crowns or ancient vampire power, but in the radical act of being genuine in a world that demanded performance. As they walked back toward the palace together, hands intertwined, Mira realized something profound. She hadn't won against 500 princesses. She'd won by never competing at all.